Bonjour and welcome back to French with Airlearn with me, Amelia. Today we're going to be looking at the basics of how to form questions in French. Now, questions can be quite tricky in French as there are several ways that you can form them to varying degrees of formality. So we're going to be covering some of these forms, both formal and informal, so that you'll feel more confident when you're out and about in France or French-speaking countries or with French people. Starting off nice and simple, French does have some simple translations of interrogative words. Interrogation just means that you're asking someone, like you're interrogating them. So, to say how many or how much, we can say combien. Combien. Nice and simple. So you can say to a shopkeeper, for example, combien, and they will tell you the price. Other examples include combien de frères et sœurs as-tu? Combien de frères et sœurs as-tu? How many brothers and sisters do you have? Or combien de langues parles-tu? Combien de langues parles-tu? How many languages do you speak? Combien, nice and easy. Next, to say why, we use pourquoi. This literally means for what. Pourquoi apprends-tu le français? Pourquoi apprends-tu le français? Why are you learning French? Or, pourquoi tu m'as pas répondu? Pourquoi tu m'as pas répondu? Why haven't you responded to me? Again, nice and simple. Next, we have comment, which means how. Comment as-tu appris le français? Comment as-tu appris le français? How have you learned French? Or you can say, tu as trouvé le film comment? Tu as trouvé le film comment? How did you find the film? As in, did you enjoy the film? Comment can also be used in this context. These are all pretty straightforward constructs. It starts to get a little trickier when we include who, which, and what. So, looking at how to say what, at its core, what is quoi? And I'm sure that you've heard plenty of people use this in conversation in French. You can use it, for example, when you haven't heard someone. You can say quoi, although be careful because this is a little informal, the equivalent of saying what in English. But as I mentioned, what is one of the interrogatives that's a little bit trickier as it takes on several different forms. Other than just quoi, we can use the long form of what, which gives qu'est-ce que c'est. You can use this long form to say, what is that, when pointing at something you don't know the name of. Qu'est-ce que c'est? Qu'est-ce que c'est? Qu'est-ce que c'est? Or you can incorporate it into a phrase like qu'est-ce que c'est ce bruit? Qu'est-ce que c'est ce bruit? What is this noise? Equally, you don't have to use the entire phrase to form a question with what. We can also shorten it to a phrase such as qu'est-ce que tu manges? Qu'est-ce que tu manges? What are you eating? Instead of using the c'est at the end, we add the tu manges. Instead of what is that, it is what are you eating. We can also simply use the word that we just learned previously, quoi, and incorporate it into conversation. So, tu fais quoi? Tu fais quoi? What are you doing? But you can also use the form that we've just learned, qu'est-ce que tu fais? Qu'est-ce que tu fais? Also, what are you doing? They mean exactly the same thing, but the second one using qu'est-ce que is a little bit more formal. Now, moving on to which again isn't a straightforward one and has a few variations, so let's get into it. At its base, which is quel. But depending on the gender and the plurality of the noun that follows, we can add different endings to this base quel. So let's go through each possible ending. Quel est ton plat préféré? Quel est ton plat préféré? Which is your favourite dish? The thing that makes it masculine here is un plat, which is the noun, the dish. So we keep quel the same. We don't add anything to it, as it's masculine singular, like un plat. But if we say quelle est ta couleur préférée? Quelle est ta couleur préférée? Which is your favourite colour? Ta couleur is feminine, still singular, so we add an extra le to our base quel, giving us quelle. You'll notice that in English we can say what instead of which is here. What is your favourite dish? What is your favourite colour? But it's important to remember that we cannot do this in French. You have to use which, quel, and not quoi, what. It just doesn't work. Next, moving on to plural versions of quel, we have quels sont tes films préférés? Quels sont tes films préférés? Which are your favourite films? Again, not what as we can use in English, but which it has to be in French. Quels sont tes films préférés? Les films is masculine and plural, so we have to add on an extra S to quel, giving quel. Finally, we can say, quelle langue parles-tu? Quelle langue parles-tu? Which languages do you speak? In which we add an extra le and an s to this base quel, as les langues is feminine plural. What you'll notice though is no matter the endings of the quel, they all sound the same. They have the same pronunciation, which is always quel. Finally, moving on to who. Again, this has a long and a short form, just like what. So let's get into it. The long form of who is qui est-ce que? Who is it in English? For example, someone might say, il y a quelqu'un à la porte. There's someone at the door. And you might say, qui est-ce que? Who is it? But we can shorten this to just qui. So we can say, il y a quelqu'un à la porte. And you can say, qui? Who? We can also use qui with avec to say avec qui, with who. So for example, avec qui habites-tu? Avec qui habites-tu? With who do you live with? Now we've gone over the basics of French interrogatives, let's put them into some more phrases. You might have noticed that when I've been giving examples, I've been doing something called the subject-verb inversion. We do this often when we form questions in French. So, take the previous example. Avec qui habites-tu? We inverted the normal order of subject-verb to turn a statement into an interrogative, a question. So, tu habites avec ton frère. You live with your brother follows the normal order of subject-verb. But when we turn this into an interrogative, we have to invert that subject and verb and add an interrogative at the end, a question mark. So tu habites becomes habites-tu, and we put a hyphen in the middle. This construction is used a lot in French, so it's good to familiarise yourself with it. Aimes-tu le chocolat? Aimes-tu le chocolat? Do you like chocolate? And you can use it with different persons as well, like aime-t-il le chocolat? Aime-t-il le chocolat? Do they like chocolate? However, despite the fact that this construction is used a lot in French, there is a simpler and more informal way of forming questions. And that is by taking a statement and turning it into an interrogative by raising our intonation, raising our voice at the end of the phrase and adding a question mark in the written form. This way, the word order stays exactly the same and you don't need to worry about the subject-verb inversion. So, aimes-tu le chocolat becomes tu aimes le chocolat. No hyphen, no inversion. I just raise my voice at the end to show it's a question which I need an answer to. Similarly, ils aiment le chocolat. Do they like chocolate? You might find that this is a lot easier to remember and form than the inversion method, but be careful, this is quite informal and you wouldn't really use it in the written form, for example. Now, there are even more complex ways of forming questions in French, but we've gone over the basics so that you'll be confident enough to ask for something if you need it when out and about in France or a French-speaking country. So let me know if you found this useful in the comments, and avez-vous compris? Bonne continuation!